The escape pod fell through the atmosphere like a dying star, trailing fire and smoke across the purple sky of Verith Prime farmer Kethvani was the first to see it crash into the golden grain fields that stretched endlessly across the agricultural moon. And he dropped his harvesting tools and ran toward the impact site with all 6 of his legs carrying him as fast as they could move. The Kethari were an insectoid species, standing roughly 5 feet tall with shimmering carapaces that reflected light in beautiful patterns of blue and green. And they had lived on this quiet moon for over 2,000 years, growing crops and developing medicines that they traded peacefully with other species across the galaxy. They had no weapons and they had no enemies because they had chosen, long ago, to remain neutral in all conflicts, believing that peace was the greatest treasure any civilization could possess. When Kethvani reached the crater, he found the pod cracked open like an egg. And inside was something he had never seen before. It was a creature with soft pink skin and no protective shell at all, with red liquid seeping from dozens of wounds across its broken body. And it breathed in shallow gasps that suggested death was only moments away. Kethvani did not know what this creature was or where it had come from, but he knew that it was alive and that it was suffering. And that was enough for him to make his decision. He carefully lifted the wounded stranger and carried it back to the colony. Within hours, word had spread to Elder Mother Shivithka, the ancient leader of all Kethari on Verith Prime, and she traveled from the central hive to see this mysterious visitor with her own compound eyes. The creature lay on a medical platform, surrounded by confused bioengineers who had never worked on such alien biology before. And Shivithka studied it for a long time in silence. "What is it?" asked her chief advisor, a younger Kethari named Threll, who was known for his cautious nature. "I do not know," Shivithka admitted, her mandibles clicking softly as she thought. "It wears military markings," Threll observed, pointing to the tattered uniform that clung to the creature's damaged form. "This is a soldier, Elder Mother, and soldiers mean war. And war is something we have avoided for millennia. You suggest we let it die?" "I suggest we consider our options carefully before we become involved in conflicts that do not concern us." Shivithka moved closer to the platform and looked down at the stranger's face, at the closed eyes and the features twisted in pain even during unconsciousness. And she saw something that her advisor did not see. She saw a living being alone and far from home, fighting for survival against impossible odds. "Summon our finest bioengineers," she commanded. "Tell them to save this creature's life, Elder Mother. The cost alone." "I did not ask for an accounting of costs," Shivithka interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I gave an order, and so the work began for 3 months. The greatest medical minds among the Kethari labored to understand human physiology, a species they had never encountered before. And they made mistakes, and they learned from those mistakes, and they tried again. They rebuilt shattered bones using bioengineered compounds that fused with the stranger's skeleton. And they repaired damaged organs with techniques they invented specifically for this single patient. And they worked through cycles of sleep and waking because Shivithka had asked them to save a life. And saving lives was what the Kethari did best. The stranger's name, they eventually learned from recovered data in the escape pod, was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chun of the United Earth ship Resolute, and his vessel had been destroyed in an ambush by something called the Dominion of Scar. None of these names meant anything to the Kethari, who had deliberately avoided learning about the wars and empires that burned across the galaxy. But they understood that Marcus Chun had survived something terrible and had somehow found his way to their quiet moon on the 93rd day. Marcus Chen opened his eyes. He woke in confusion and fear, surrounded by beings that looked like giant insects, and his first instinct was to fight. But his body refused to obey because it was still healing from wounds that should have killed him. Shivithka was there when he woke, sitting patiently beside his bed, as she had done many times during his long recovery. And she spoke to him in a language he could not understand while her compound eyes studied him with something that looked remarkably like compassion. Over the following weeks, they taught each other to communicate, and Marcus learned the musical clicking language of the Cathari, while they learned the harsh sounds of human speech. And slowly the barriers between them fell away. "Why did you save me?" Marcus asked one evening. When he was finally strong enough to sit up on his own, Shivithka tilted her head in the way she did when she was considering a question carefully. "You were dying," she said simply, "but you did not know me. And you did not know my people. And saving me cost you resources and time and energy that you could have used elsewhere." "Yes. Then why?" The elder mother reached out with one of her delicate forelimbs and touched Marcus Chen's face. A gesture of connection that transcended species boundaries. "Because life is precious," she said. "And because kindness needs no reason other than itself." Marcus stayed on Verith Prime for 6 more months, recovering his strength and learning about the peaceful civilization that had saved him when they had every reason to let him die. He learned about their philosophy of neutrality and their belief that violence was always a failure of imagination. And he learned about their beautiful art and their sophisticated science and their deep connection to the land they cultivated. He also learned that they were completely defenseless, and that their survival depended entirely on the fact that no one considered them worth conquering. The day finally came when a trade vessel arrived that could carry Marcus back to human space. And he stood before the elder mother one last time. "I do not know how to thank you for what you have done," he said. "Thanks are unnecessary, perhaps, but I will give them anyway, and I will give you something more than thanks." Marcus Chan knelt before Shivithka, a gesture of deep respect in human culture, and he looked up at her with eyes that burned with an intensity she had never seen before. "I will remember this," he said. "My people will remember this, and we always repay our debts, always, no matter how long it takes." Shivithka clicked her mandibles in gentle amusement, a sound that served as laughter among her kind. "You owe us nothing," she said. "That is where you are wrong, elder mother, and one day I will prove it to you." He boarded the trade vessel and disappeared into the stars. And Shivithka returned to her duties, and 43 years passed like water flowing downstream. She thought of him sometimes, the strange soft creature who had crashed into their fields and somehow survived. And she wondered if he had made it home safely. She never imagined that he had spent every single day of those 43 years preparing to keep his promise. 43 years had transformed the Cathari colonies from a single agricultural moon into a modest network of 7 thriving worlds, each one dedicated to growing the exceptional crops and medicines that made the insectoid species valuable trading partners across the galaxy. They remained neutral in all conflicts, as they always had, and they kept no weapons and maintained no military, believing that their peaceful nature would protect them from the violence that plagued other civilizations for 4 decades. This belief had proven correct. The galaxy was vast and chaotic, filled with empires rising and falling, and wars erupting over resources and ideology and simple hatred. But the Cathari existed outside of all that chaos, tending their fields and perfecting their bioengineering and herding. No one elder mother Shivithka had grown ancient in the years since Marcus Chen had departed, her carapace fading from vibrant blue-green to a dignified silver that marked her as one of the oldest living Cathari. And she had led her people through decades of prosperity and peace. She had begun preparing for her final molt, the natural end that came to all Cathari who lived long enough. And she was content that she would leave her civilization better than she had found it. Then the Dominion of Scar arrived. The warning came from a trading vessel that barely escaped the blockade, its captain screaming into communication channels. about massive warships and demands for surrender and threats of complete annihilation. Within hours, the truth became horrifyingly clear: the Dominion of Scar, the same empire that had destroyed the ship carrying Marcus Chun so many years ago, had grown from a regional threat into a galaxy-spanning nightmare, conquering hundreds of worlds and enslaving billions of beings across countless star systems. And now their expansion had reached Kethari space warlord Kethvax, commander of the Dominion's expansion fleet, appeared on every screen across all 7 Kethari worlds. His reptilian face twisted into an expression of cruel amusement. He was massive, nearly 8 feet tall, with scales the color of dry blood and eyes that held no trace of mercy or compassion. And when he spoke, his voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never known defeat. "Attention, Kethari colonies," he announced. "Your worlds now belong to the Dominion of Scar, and you will submit to the following terms." The terms were devastating: complete surrender of all governing authority to Dominion military command, conversion of all agricultural output to Dominion military supply chains, leaving the Kethari dependent on whatever scraps their new masters chose to provide, and finally, the processing of 30% of the Kethari population for labor camps, where they would work until death building weapons and ships for the Dominion war machine. "You have 2 solar cycles to accept these terms," Warlord Kethvax concluded. "Refusal will result in the complete destruction of your species. And I assure you, we have destroyed many species before yours, and we have become very efficient at the task." The transmission ended, and silence fell across the Kethari world's elder mother. Shivithka called an emergency council of all colony leaders, and they gathered via communication screens because there was no time for physical travel, and their faces displayed the same expression of horrified disbelief. "We must reach out to the Galactic Concord," suggested one leader. "They exist to prevent exactly this kind of aggression." "The Galactic Concord has already refused our petition," reported another, her voice heavy with despair. "They say the Dominion is too powerful to challenge, and that our worlds are too insignificant to justify the risk of wider war. Perhaps we could negotiate," offered a third. "Surely there is something we could offer that would—" "There is nothing," Shivithka interrupted, her ancient voice cutting through the desperate chatter. "I have seen beings like this warlord before, and they do not negotiate in good faith, and they do not show mercy to those who submit. Then what do we do?" The elder mother was silent for a long moment, considering the question that had no good answer. "We have no weapons," she said finally. "We have no military, and we have no allies willing to fight on our behalf. And we cannot defeat a force that has conquered hundreds of worlds. So we surrender?" "No." Shivithka's compound eyes gleamed with something that her people rarely saw in their pacifist culture, something that looked almost like defiance. "We do not surrender, and we do not submit. And we do not allow our children to be taken to die in labor camps, because some things are worth more than survival. But elder mother, if we resist, they will kill us all. Perhaps. But they will know that we chose to die as ourselves rather than live as their slaves. And that choice is the only thing they cannot take from us." The council fell silent, and one by one, the colony leaders nodded their agreement. Because Shivithka was right, there were worse things than death, and submission to the Dominion was one of them. On the final night before the deadline, Shivithka walked through the fields of Verith Prime, the same golden grain fields where a damaged escape pod had crashed so many years ago. And she wondered if she had made the right choice all those decades past. She had saved a single human life, because she believed that kindness was its own reward. And she still believed that, even now at the end of everything. But she could not help wondering what had become of Marcus Chun, the wounded stranger who had promised to remember, who had sworn that humanity always repaid their debts. She hoped he had found happiness somewhere among the stars. Far from the darkness that was about to consume her people, a young communications officer came running through the fields, his legs carrying him with urgent speed, and Shivithka turned to face him with tired resignation. "What is it?" she asked, expecting news of the Dominion's early attack. "Elder Mother? You need to see this," the young officer gasped. "Our sensors have detected something at the edge of the system. Something impossible. The Dominion? No, Elder Mother, these signatures are different. And there are thousands of them. Thousands of ships emerging from fold space. More ships than I have ever seen in one place." Shivithka felt something she had not felt in decades. Something that might have been hope. "Identify them," she commanded. The young officer's voice trembled as he spoke the words that would change everything. "The ships are broadcasting identification codes. Elder Mother, and they are human." Shivithka's ancient heart began to beat faster, and she turned her eyes toward the stars, toward the impossible fleet that had arrived at the darkest moment of her people's history. After 43 years, Marcus Chun had kept his promise. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Remembrance and watched through the viewport as his fleet emerged from fold space in perfect formation. 2,400 warships appearing from nothing, like an army of ghosts materializing from the void. He was 71 years old now. His hair turned silver and his face lined with the marks of decades spent climbing through military ranks and accumulating the power he would need for this moment. But his eyes still held the same fierce intensity that Elder Mother Shivithka had seen when he knelt before her so many years ago. Behind the remembrance came the battlecruisers, massive vessels bristling with weapons that could crack planets. And behind them came the carriers with their thousands of fighter craft ready to launch. And behind them came the destroyers and the frigates and the support ships and the troop transports. It was the largest human armada ever assembled for a single operation, representing nearly half of the entire United Earth combined fleet. And Marcus Chun had spent his entire career building toward this moment. 43 years of promotions and political maneuvering and careful planning. 43 years of watching the Dominion of Scar expand across the galaxy and wondering when they would finally reach Cathari space. 43 years of preparing for a debt he had sworn to repay. His second-in-command, Vice Admiral Sarah Okonkwo, approached with a tablet displaying sensor readings. "Admiral, the Dominion fleet is holding position near the fourth planet, and they appear to be preparing for their deadline ultimatum against the Cathari colonies." "How many ships?" "Over 4,000 confirmed, sir, with more likely in reserve, and they outnumber us nearly 2-to-1. Marcus Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Good, sir. I want him confident, Admiral Okonkwo, because confident enemies make mistakes, and I intend to give them many opportunities for error." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the Dominion command ship. All frequencies, and make sure this broadcast reaches every ship in their fleet and every colony in this system. Channel open." Admiral Marcus Chun straightened his uniform and faced the communication array, knowing that his words would be heard by millions of beings across multiple worlds. "This is Admiral Marcus Chun of the United Earth Combined Fleet, addressing Warlord Kethvax of the Dominion of Scar." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. 43 years ago, my ship was destroyed by your forces, and I was the only survivor, drifting through space in a damaged escape pod that crashed on the agricultural moon of Vareth Prime. I should have died, but the Cathari saved my life, and they asked nothing in return. And they showed me kindness when they had every reason to leave me to my fate. I made them a promise that day, Warlord, and I told them that humanity would remember what they had done, and that we always repay our debts. His voice hardened like steel being forged in fire. This system is now under the protection of the United Earth government, and the Cathari people are under our shield. and you will withdraw your forces immediately or face the consequences. The response came quickly. Warlord Kethvak's reptilian face appearing on screen with an expression of amused contempt. Admiral Chun. I remember the Resolute, and I remember ordering its destruction. And I am pleased to learn that you survived so that I might have the opportunity to kill you personally. You bring impressive numbers. Human, but my fleet still outnumbers yours significantly. And the Dominion has never lost a major engagement against any species in the galaxy. Withdraw now, and I will allow your ships to retreat with honor. But if you choose to fight, I will destroy your fleet, and then I will enslave the Kethari anyway. And your gesture will have meant nothing, Marcus Chum laughed. And the sound carried genuine amusement, Warlord. You have made two critical errors in your assessment. First, you assume that numerical superiority guarantees victory, which tells me that you have never truly fought humans before, because we have won wars against odds far worse than these. Second, you assume that I came here expecting to survive. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with 4 decades of determination. I did not assemble this fleet because I calculated we could win, Warlord, but because the Kethari showed kindness to a dying stranger. And that kindness deserves to be answered. And if answering it costs my life and the lives of everyone under my command, then that is a price we are willing to pay, because that is what humanity does for our friends. Warlord Kethvak's expression shifted, the contempt giving way to something that might have been uncertainty. You would die for a species that is not your own? I would die for a species that saved my life when they gained nothing from doing so. And every human in this fleet volunteered for this mission, knowing the odds. And not one of them hesitated. So here is my counteroffer, Warlord. And you should consider it carefully. Withdraw your forces now and return to Dominion space. And you can tell your superiors that the Kethari are protected. And this system is close to your expansion forever. Refuse. And we will show you why humanity has never lost a war when our friends are threatened. The communication ended, and silence fell across the bridge of the Remembrance. Vice Admiral Okonkwo spoke quietly. Sir, do you really believe we can win against those numbers? Marcus Chun turned to look at her, and his eyes held the calm certainty of someone who had accepted his fate. Long ago, I believed that the Kethari deserved to survive. And I believe that humanity keeps its promises, and beyond that, I believe that we are about to teach the Dominion a lesson they will never forget. Even if we lose? Especially if we lose, Admiral, because even in defeat, the galaxy will learn what happens when you threaten the friends of humanity across the void of space. The Dominion fleet began to move. Thousands of warships turning toward the human armada with weapons charging. Warlord Kethvak's had made his choice, and now Admiral Marcus Chun would make good on a promise he had carried for 43 years. The Battle of Vareth began with fire and ended with legend. Warlord Kethvak's ordered his fleet forward in a standard Dominion assault pattern, the same pattern that had crushed hundreds of enemy fleets across the galaxy. A massive wave of ships advancing together to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers and firepower. He expected the humans to hold their position and try to absorb the assault, because that was what every other species had done when facing Dominion aggression. And they had all died the same way. But Admiral Marcus Chun did something unexpected. Instead of holding formation, the human fleet scattered ships that had been flying in tight defensive groups suddenly broke apart and dispersed across the battlefield in what appeared to be complete chaos, moving in random patterns that made no tactical sense to Dominion strategists. Kethvak's laughed when he saw it, believing the humans had panicked and lost their discipline under pressure. He was wrong. The chaos was an illusion, a carefully choreographed dance that had been practiced in simulations for years. And what looked like random movement was actually a complex web of overlapping fire lanes and mutual support positions. The Dominion fleet charged into what they thought was a broken enemy. and they found themselves surrounded by a storm of destruction. Human ships appeared from unexpected angles, striking at weak points in the Dominion formation and then vanishing before counterattacks could land. And every time Kethvax ordered his forces to pursue one group of attackers, another group would hit them from behind. Marcus Chun commanded the battle from the Bridge of the Remembrance, watching holographic displays that showed the positions of every ship in real time. And his orders flowed constantly. Destroyer Group 7. Execute flanking pattern Delta on the enemy carrier, and Carrier Group 3. Launch fighters to screen the withdrawal of Battlecruiser Squadron 2. Enemy command ship is trying to regroup their formations. Have electronic warfare divisions scramble their communications. Boarding parties prepare for assault on the marked cruisers. I want those ships captured intact. This was the human way of war. Not the brutal head-on assault that the Dominion expected, but a fluid and adaptive style that turned every strength into a weakness. The Dominion relied on overwhelming numbers, so the humans avoided direct confrontation and forced them to chase smaller targets across the entire battlefield. The Dominion relied on coordinated formations, so the humans used electronic warfare to disrupt their communications and isolate their ships into smaller groups that could be destroyed piece by piece. The Dominion relied on the terror of their reputation, so the humans broadcast their own messages across all frequencies, drowning out the warlord's commands with a simple statement repeated again and again: humanity remembers, humanity repays, and humanity protects its friends. The battle raged for hours, and the space around Vareth Prime filled with the burning wreckage of warships from both fleets. But as time passed, a terrible truth became clear to Warlord Kethvax. He was losing. Despite outnumbering the humans nearly 2-1, his fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to fight the way enemies were supposed to fight. And every tactic he tried was countered by something unexpected. His carriers found themselves surrounded by human fighters that appeared from nowhere and vanished before his own craft could respond. His battleships were lured into traps where they faced crossfire from multiple directions, while their own weapons struggled to track targets that never stopped moving. His command structure collapsed as human boarding parties captured ship after ship, turning the Dominion's own vessels against their allies in acts of humiliation that would echo across the galaxy. And through it all, Admiral Marcus Chung continued broadcasting, his voice reaching not just the battlefield, but every receiver in the system and beyond. This is what happens when you threaten the friends of humanity. The Githari asked for nothing when they saved my life, and they expected nothing in return. And that is exactly why we came, because in the entire galaxy, with all its wars and empires and cruelty, they chose to be kind. And kindness is the rarest thing in the universe. And we will burn 1,000 fleets to protect it. Warlord Kethvax made his final mistake when he ordered his flagship to charge directly at the Remembrance, believing that killing the human admiral would break the enemy's morale and turn the tide of battle. It was exactly what Marcus Chun had been waiting for. As the massive Dominion command ship approached, human vessels converged from every direction, not to destroy it, but to disable its engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. Boarding parties launched in dozens of assault craft, breaching the hull at multiple points and flooding the corridors with Marines who had trained specifically for this operation. The fighting inside the Dominion flagship was fierce and brutal. Scar warriors against human soldiers in close combat where neither side gave quarter. But the humans had advantages the Dominion had not expected. They fought not as individuals seeking glory, but as coordinated units that supported each other without hesitation. And they used tactics that seemed reckless but were actually calculated to minimize their own losses while maximizing damage to the enemy. Within 2 hours, the Dominion flagship was captured, and Warlord Kethvax was dragged onto the bridge in restraints, forced to watch as his remaining fleet either surrendered or fled into the darkness between stars. Admiral Marcus Chun appeared on the screen before him, 71 years old and exhausted from the longest day of his life. But his eyes still burned with the same fire that had never faded since the day he promised an insectoid elder mother that humanity would remember. "Your fleet is broken," Chun said. "Your warriors are captured or dead, and your empire's expansion into this region of space ends today. You will face tribunal for your crimes, Warlord, not just against humanity, but against every species you have conquered and enslaved. And the galaxy will know what happens to those who threaten the defenseless." Kethvax stared at him with hatred and disbelief. All of this for insects who grow plants. And all of this for a debt from 43 years ago. "Yes, you are insane. All of you humans are insane," Marcus Chun smiled. And this time, there was no warmth in it at all. "Perhaps. But we are the kind of insane that keeps our promises. And if that makes us terrifying, then let the galaxy be terrified. Because any species out there that is considering showing kindness to a stranger should know that if they do, and if they ever need help, humanity will come for them. And any species out there that is considering harming the innocent should know that if they do, and if those innocent have ever shown kindness to even one of us, humanity will come for them too. The battle was over, the debt was paid, but the consequences of that day would reshape the galaxy forever." In the days that followed the Battle of Vareth, the galaxy held its breath and watched what would happen next. Word spread faster than light through communication networks and trade routes and diplomatic channels, carried by witnesses and survivors and those who had simply heard the broadcast that Admiral Marcus Chen had sent across every frequency. The story seemed impossible at first, too perfect to be true, but the evidence was undeniable. A peaceful species with no military and no allies had faced certain destruction at the hands of the most feared empire in known space. And humanity had appeared from nowhere with the largest fleet ever assembled for a single mission. And they had crushed the Dominion forces in a battle that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come, all because of a single act of kindness performed 43 years earlier, all because the Kethari had saved one wounded human who had crashed on their moon and asked nothing in return. The implications terrified some species and gave others hope. And both reactions were appropriate, because the message was clear to anyone who understood what they had witnessed. Humanity remembered its debts, and humanity paid them back with interest. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Marcus Chun descended to the surface of Vareth Prime for the first time since he had left as a recovering patient. More than 4 decades earlier, the shuttle landed in the same golden grain fields where his escape pod had crashed so long ago, and he stepped onto ground that he had never expected to see again. Elder Mother Shivithkisa was waiting for him. She had grown impossibly old, her silver carapace marking her as ancient even by the long-lived standards of her species. And she moved slowly now with the careful steps of someone who knew her time was limited, but her compound eyes were still bright, and they still held the same compassion that had convinced her to save a dying stranger when everyone around her had counseled caution. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the human admiral and the insectoid elder, 2 beings from different worlds whose lives had become intertwined by a single choice made in a moment of crisis. Then Shivithka reached out with trembling forelimbs and touched Marcus Chun's face, exactly as she had done when he first woke in her care all those years ago. "You came back," she said. "I always intended to. We saved 1 life. And you saved billions." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You saved 1 life because it was the right thing to do, when it cost you everything and gained you nothing. And that choice is worth more than any fleet I could ever command. The galaxy calls you heroes now, Shivaka said. They say that humanity is the greatest force for good in known space. And they seek alliances with your government because they hope you will protect them as you protected us. And what do you say? The Elder Mother was quiet for a long time, her mandibles clicking softly as she considered her words. I say that you were a frightened young soldier dying alone far from home. And we did what anyone should do when they find someone in need. I did not save you to create a debt, Marcus Chen. And I did not save you hoping for a reward. I know. Then why did you come, truly? And why did you bring all those ships and risk all those lives for a species you barely know? Marcus Chen looked out across the golden fields. The same fields that had cushioned his fall and given him a second chance at life. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 43 years of certainty. Because kindness is the rarest thing in the universe, he said. And when I found it here, I knew I could never let it be destroyed. The galaxy is cruel, Elder Mother. And most species learn that cruelty early and carry it with them forever. And they hurt others because they were hurt, and the cycle continues without end. But you broke that cycle. And you chose mercy when you had every reason to choose indifference. And that choice showed me something I had never believed before. What did it show you? That it was possible to be better, and that strength and kindness were not opposites, and that the universe did not have to be the dark and terrible place I had always assumed it was. You gave me hope, Shivithka, and hope is worth dying for. The Elder Mother's compound eyes glistened with something that might have been moisture, though her species did not cry the way humans did. Stay, she said. Stay here on Verith Prime, and let us repay you in the only way we know how. By giving you a home, Marcus Chen smiled, and for the first time in decades, the smile reached his eyes. I would like that very much. In the months that followed, Admiral Marcus Chen retired from the United Earth Combined Fleet and accepted honorary citizenship among the Kethari, becoming the first human to be formally adopted into their civilization. He helped them establish their first diplomatic course, teaching them how to navigate the complex politics of a galaxy that suddenly wanted to know them. And he advised their leaders on how to maintain their peaceful values while building relationships with species that respected strength. The United Earth government stationed a permanent garrison at Varth Prime, warships orbiting the agricultural moon as a constant reminder that humanity's protection was not temporary. Species from across the galaxy sent representatives to the Kethari worlds, hoping to learn from the civilization that had earned humanity's loyalty. And many of them found that the insectoid farmers had wisdom worth hearing. The Dominion of Scar, its expansion halted and its reputation shattered, faced internal rebellions as conquered species, saw that resistance was possible and that there were allies willing to help. The galaxy was changing, and the change had begun with a single act of kindness on clear nights. Marcus Chen would sit with Shivithka in the gardens near the central hive, watching the stars that had brought them together so long ago. Do you think all humans would have done what you did? She asked him once Marcus considered the question carefully, because it deserved a careful answer. I think humans are capable of almost anything, he said finally. We can be cruel beyond measure, and we can be kind beyond belief. And we have committed the worst atrocities in known space, and also the greatest acts of sacrifice. What we become depends on many things, but I have found that it depends most on how we are treated. You treated me like I mattered, Shivithka, and so I became someone who could matter back. The Elder Mother clicked her mandibles softly in the gesture that served as a smile among her people. Then perhaps mercy is never wasted, she said. Even when it seems foolish, even when it costs us, even when we cannot imagine how it will ever be repaid. Perhaps every act of kindness plants a seed that will grow in ways we cannot predict. Marcus Chen looked up at the stars. at the patrol cruiser gliding silently overhead, at the galaxy that had been transformed by a single choice. The debt will never be fully repaid, he said. And I plan to spend the rest of my life trying anyway. Shivithka reached out and took his hand in her forelimbs, a gesture of connection that had become natural between them over the years. Good, she said, because I have learned that the best debts are the ones that keep us connected to each other. And the best promises are the ones we keep trying to fulfill, even when we know we never can. That is what makes us more than strangers, Marcus Chun, and that is what makes us family above them. The stars burned bright and eternal, witnesses to a friendship that had begun with mercy and grown into something that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, other species looked toward the light of Verith Prime and wondered if perhaps kindness was not weakness after all. Perhaps kindness was the strongest force in the universe, strong enough to bring an armada across the stars, strong enough to topple empires, strong enough to change everything. Perhaps mercy was never wasted, and perhaps humanity would always remember.